That wonderful introduction, John, and thank you for inviting us to the Alliance. Thanks for spending your sunny day with us. As John said, my name is Emily. I use she and her pronouns, and I am one of four staff members at the Welcome Home Coalition. And under my responsibilities are communications and development. And so, we kind of launched this panel in response to really big growth in shelter, especially in the city of Portland, but really wanted to see our investments with so many cuts to our social safety nets, our investments go as far as they can, right? And really focus on shelters that are successfully not just keeping people safe from the elements, but actually moving people into housing that they then are successful in staying in. And so unfortunately, Emmy Ritter from Raphael House had a last minute conflict and is unable to join us today, but we'll still hear from three shelter providers across Multnomah, Clackamas, and Washington counties that do really high quality shelter that result in stable housing. We have Peter, Elise, and Brandy. If y'all want to do a quick introduction, I'll jump into an overview presentation and then hand it off to you all.
Hey everyone, I'm Peter Rosenblatt and I am the Senior Program Manager at Northwest Housing Alternatives, and I oversee the Annie Ross Housing Services Program Array, which I'll talk about more in a little bit.
Hi, I'm Elise Schaff-Laubach, and the Executive Director for Family Promise of Tualatin Valley. We operate a 70-room family shelter in Tigard and serve all of Washington County.
And hi, everybody. I am Brandy Tuck. I'm Executive Director at Path Home. We operate Family Village Shelter that I'll tell you about. And I just have to say, it is so fun to see so many friends here today. Sarah Bell and Ray and Carol Turner and David Groff and Sally Rosenfeld and Cynthia Yee and Dave Albertine and John Elizalde. I just wanted to say hi. It's so nice to see all of your faces.
Great. I'll kick us off with just a little stage setting about what's going on. These stats are primarily focused on Multnomah County, but I feel like they're informative of, it looks like I did request share screen of what are the best, what we see as the best solutions to moving folks from homelessness back into stable housing. Okay, cool. I got the share request.
Emily, this is Sarah Bell. Is there anyone else on your team that will want to be sharing?
Yes, Brandy and Elise will both have their own slides from their computer. Thank you. And then Peter goes a la carte, I guess, and doesn't have slides.
Okay.
So what we're talking about today, as John already laid out, and the members, all the folks presenting are members of the Welcome Home Coalition, are what are elements of successful shelter, with defining success as moving people into housing, right? That has to be our end goal. And featured above are all of your shelters that, offer those qualities that we see as stabilizing forces for folks. Who we are. So Welcome Home is a coalition of over 100 nonprofits and individual members. We specifically work to build our base with folks who have been impacted by housing instability. We know that if folks who have accessed the systems and the folks who are administering the systems aren't on the same page, we're going to build really flawed systems. And so our goal is to get those folks together and build out more successful systems. And at our core, we believe that everyone deserves a stable home. So just some cute photos of us gathering to advocate for our shared goals and shared policies across the Portland metro region. We're regional. So we were lucky enough, I think I have time today to show this video. We were lucky enough last year to take part in a survey of working with over 600 people who've been homeless in the Portland area in the last 5 years, most of them actively homeless, and just asked the simple question, like, what would it take for you to be reconnected to housing? 91% named affordability as their biggest barrier. 91% also said if I was offered housing I could afford today, I would move inside. We just like to share that because there's this big narrative around service resistance, when really it's just access to those support services that are keeping people from stabilizing. And people readily self-identified extra support they may need outside of rent assistance, right? Some folks just need that cash support. Other folks were like, I would love, support with finding a job again, or support with my recovery. So folks know what they need, and we just need to listen to them. And that's always a value like Welcome Home wants to bring to our policy making. I'm hoping I can play the video. So this video is based on that project, capturing some of those voices. Tell me if you can hear the sound. Can people hear the sound? No. Okay, yeah, I was like, I think it looks... Okay, then maybe I will just drop it in the chat and encourage you all to listen when you get the chance. It's a really great video. I feel like it really captures some of the amazing perspectives of folks who participated. Let me get back to presenting. So this is data straight from Multnomah County's own shelter report, released, I think, early this year, if not late 2025. And right now, unfortunately, only 12% of people move into permanent housing from congregate shelter. And specifically, right, what we're naming here is congregate shelter. And when we talk about congregate shelter, that's the type of shelter that is, a cot or a different form of bed in a big shared room. There's not that level of privacy. There's not necessarily support services on site. So if someone is ready to move into housing, those services aren't readily accessible. The point of congregate shelter is like, cool place to be if it's hot, or warm place to be if it's cold. And that's really important. And it's not the tool we can use to move people into housing, right? Which is what we see as the end goal. So when we're saying congregate shelter, that's what we mean. More like cots in a basement that is offering a basic level of safety to folks, but it's not reaching our end goal of housing. So currently Multnomah County is spending $3,000 a month on one congregate shelter bed. So that's a lot of money to be spending to maintain a bed that does not result in that person then accessing stable housing. I mean, I know I'm not paying $3,000 a month for rent. So that's a lot for a bed in a room that does not come with additional services, right? And I always like to clarify when I start naming numbers, we will have to spend money to help people, right? We're not always trying to frame this as the most budget-friendly thing. It's what works and what is good for the person themselves. But also when you're trying to sell this, like the money talks if we're spending $3,000 a month on congregate shelter, right? So like I said, emergency shelter has a role in our system for sure, but the end goal needs to be a system that moves people from homelessness into housing. And in Multnomah County, in comparison to that $3,000 a night for congregate shelters, it only costs around $1,200 a month to provide rent assistance, right? Housing people is far cheaper than our shelter systems and far better for that individual, right? So we always really advocate for seeing more rent assistance. I will say the city of Portland just passed some of that unspent housing dollars for rent assistance. Super happy about that. It's not going to capture all the need, but it is forward movement. So folks are starting to understand how crucial that is to the system. And also just highlighting that incarceration is the most costly response to homelessness. The first person in Portland was arrested purely for living outside this year, right? Like this is happening in the city of Portland, and it is the most expensive and most inhumane approach to homelessness. In comparison, offering housing that is paired with support, if someone is like, really, really going to have a higher barrier to restabilizing housing, maybe hasn't lived out inside in a long time. Even housing that's paired with personalized support is less than a congregate shelter bed. And these are all numbers from Multnomah County, right? So that's just level setting about some of the like high level budget stuff. And then our wonderful presenters are going to show you specifically how they use their programming to get folks into housing. So I'm going to pass it off to Brandy first, and then Elise, and then Peter, if you want to finish us out. And then I left Emmy's name up here because please look into Raphael House. They also have really high success rates of moving folks into housing, and they are a domestic violence shelter. Domestic violence, this I'll put Emmy's plug in, often is excluded from a lot of qualification for homeless services. It's considered almost its own program, and yet, like, if you're fleeing domestic violence, you are by definition homeless. So really wanting to highlight the uniqueness of domestic violence and check out Raphael House. But otherwise, I'll stop sharing and hand it over to you, Brandy.
Awesome. Thanks, Emily. And again, so nice to see everybody. I'm going to bring my presentation up now. And so I'm going to just kind of give you an overview of Path Home, and then we're going to talk about our shelter and our housing programs and what works. And so many of you know that Path Home's mission is to empower homeless families with children to get back into housing and stay there. Last year, in 2025, we served over 560 families. It was over 2,100 kids and parents. We have 4 main programs that we operate. My solution to homelessness is always, if we can prevent it in the first place, that is ideal. And so we run a homeless prevention program where families who are facing eviction, they get help keeping their housing, and they never have to experience homelessness in the first place. That helps kids be able to stay in their schools, parents to be able to stay near their jobs, and the families to be able to be in their communities. This is also the most cost-effective intervention that we provide. The average investment per household total is about $4,000 of rent and utility assistance to prevent homelessness in the first place. So that's always our goal. When families do lose their homes, we have Family Village Shelter. It's a shelter for 17 families with children at a time. Each family has their own individual private bedroom with doors that lock and real furniture, plus all kinds of access to community spaces 24 hours a day. We have showers, laundry, a central kitchen and dining with food that's available 24 hours a day. Plus, we have a library and a computer lab and a playground and gardens and so much more. Family Village is the first shelter in Oregon that features trauma-informed design and architecture, which helps families heal from the crisis and trauma of homelessness and leads to better outcomes, things like shorter shelter stays and greater success moving into housing. At Family Village, 92% of families move from shelter into housing. And the average length of stay is 106 days, which is about 3.5 months. And I have this is a PowerPoint I use quite a bit, but trauma-informed design is about a big connection to nature, physical, emotional, psychological safety, giving people voice and choice and power over how they use the space, being really transparent and clear on expectations and wayfinding and all kinds of good stuff. These are some of the pictures of our shelter. These are the rooms that families get. This is our beautiful common space where we've got lots of flexible areas for families to play together, our beautiful library, our kids' play area, and then we have our gardens and our playground. And so we help all the families from shelter move back into housing, plus lots more from a centralized Multnomah County wait list. So we serve about 250 families a year in our Housing First program. And we are really proud that 87% of those families keep their housing long-term. And that's really because we implement the Housing First model to fidelity. And Housing First has 3 components. It's an evidence-based practice that has been proven around the world to work even for those people who have the most severe mental illness and substance abuse disorder. So there are 3 components to Housing First. First, you minimize the time that someone's homeless and you help them quickly move back into housing. Second, you provide rent assistance to people. And there's a third component that I'll get to in just a second, but those first 2 pieces are really the only pieces that Multnomah County and the city of Portland have really ever funded in our community. And it's not always successful when you only do 2 of the 3 components of the model. There's this third piece, and it's the most important part, and that's the long-term case management, wraparound services, relationships built on trust that people need in order to address whatever's going on in their lives that led to homelessness. Path Home fully implements the Housing First model with rent assistance from Multnomah County and the city of Portland, mostly the county, and some of the, Metro SHS dollars go towards our rent assistance, but we have to raise private fundraising dollars in order to implement that third component of the Housing First model. And I feel like if we as a community, the royal we, were more intentional about implementing this evidence-based model, we would have a lot more success in our community. We also have a basic income guarantee program. I'm going to skip this for a second. You can see I put together some comparisons of our shelter program versus our housing program. And you can see that the shelter is almost as expensive as our housing program. We only serve about 60 families a year through our shelter program, compared to 250 families a year in our housing program for just, $800,000 more a year. On average at Path Home, it costs about, like I said, $4,000 to prevent homelessness, cost about $20,000 to shelter a family, and it costs anywhere between $12,000 and $19,000 to house a family with that 87% success rate. And so not only is housing, really gives people that calm to their nervous system. When you experience homelessness, you are stressed. You are in fight, flight, or freeze survival mode in your brain. And your brain is in a way that you don't have access to your critical thinking, logical part of your brain. And so you really are in that fight, flight, or freeze response. And so only by moving into like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? What's on the bottom is shelter, safety, security, food. You need that base of the pyramid in order to do things like get sober or get a job or deal with your mental health concerns. So when we move someone into housing, they're able to really help change what's going on in their brain, move out of that survival mode, fight, flight, or freeze, and actually start to move up that pyramid towards improving their lives. I think I'll stop there for now. I have some other slides if we want to, but I'll stop there. And Emily, do we want to do all the presentations before questions?
I think so, just to make
Okay.
sure we have, everybody gets their time. So if folks hold questions at the end, hoping I have like 15 minutes at the end to do it. And then Elise, if you want to take it away.
All right, hold on. Let me get to share screen. And to slideshow. There we go. Okay, everyone's seeing it big as slideshow? Excellent, fantastic. So I'm with Family Promise of Tualatin Valley. We're actually an affiliate of a national organization that was started to use community resources and partnerships to help support families experiencing homelessness. So the national model started as a rotational shelter model where families would sleep overnight in civic or religious organizations for a week at a time. And there was a day center that was part of it where they would go for showers and laundry and case management. And then they would rotate through these different places, and the churches had the space and the volunteers and the capacity to be able to create that, to create meals, to create community. And so that is how we started out in 2017 serving families. And our model changed completely with the onset of the COVID pandemic. And we were able to purchase a hotel site through a statewide initiative called Project Turnkey, which allowed organizations like ours to take spaces that were more or less ready to go. So some of the things that Brandy mentioned that will echo, where it's rooms that have privacy, doors that lock, individual bathrooms in those spaces. So families we have a number of adjoining rooms for larger families. And then we've remodeled the space so that on site we have a commercial kitchen and dining area for the families. And as well as there's a play area and a laundry room and a multi-purpose room and a teen lounge and spaces like that for families to gather. So this is our current model. I have our 2025 numbers up there. We had 518 individuals in shelter, and 77% of them exited shelter to housing. And that's really because of the partnership with case management, the ability to continue to support them. So we have 3 case managers and 2 what we call shelter housing liaisons. We also really tried to make the space as much of a, not just a way station, not just a survival space, but a space where families can thrive. So we have enrichment programs for kids. We try to utilize the school break times to have camps and classes. We plug in with life skills for adults like financial literacy, and then try to have as many partnerships with local resources, bringing them to the shelter space so that it can remove that barrier for families. If you're trying to get enrolled in healthcare and you have to drag 3 kiddos and sit in some DHS office for hours and hours at the time, that can be a significant barrier to engaging with, healthcare services and getting enrolled. So we really try to bring as many of those things to our site. We also have a housing program. In general, we don't consider ourselves a shelter, even though that is part of our program. We consider ourselves a rehousing program. So the case managers in that help families do things they need to, like recreate documentation, create applications for housing vouchers, and overcome barriers. Some folks who have had evictions, some of those things need to be mitigated. You need to do landlord advocacy. If someone has experienced incarceration, sometimes partnering with even their, oh my goodness, I don't have my words today. I'm sorry, you guys. Partnering with the parole officer to, write supportive letters and documentation, really just trying to do what we can to overcome those barriers to housing. And so those are the folks that we support in that way. We also, as Brandy mentioned, this is something we're all going to echo. The best way to address homelessness is to prevent it from happening. And so those folks are focused on reaching out to landlords to see what can be done to keep families from being evicted, connecting them to other community resources, to ensure that housing retention. Sometimes we have funding to pay those rental or utility arrears. And we also have a new position that's housing stabilization, which is working with families that are housed. One of the things that we find is that we talk about, housing first as a primary tenet of what we do, and that it can't be housing only. We need to continue to support people in their housing. And sometimes that's bigger things like, substance use or mental health. But sometimes it's also, we make assumptions that people have the same set of skills or set of based knowledge that we do. And so good tenancy, they have obligations as a tenant to do or not do certain things, like have extra folks in their unit or report something that's broken. And likewise, they need to have advocacy and voice with their landlords to be able to say, this thing is broken, I need you to come and fix it. So even working with folks in housing to make sure they understand their rights and responsibilities. And also that things like paying your utilities in a landlord's portal aren't a barrier. I know every time I have to go into a doctor's office portal, I have to reset my password and I get confused and all of that. So for folks, who have never navigated that sort of a thing, supporting that and going along with them in that. Yep. There's my stabilization slide. Sorry about that. I got a little ahead of myself. So, it also can be that continued partnership. It can be daunting for someone, again, if you don't have a strong education or grasp of the English language, engaging with something even like WorkSource, where you're going to go regularly, having that person walk along beside you, encourage you, spend that time with you. The shelter model where it's just overnight shelter is important and life-saving, but doesn't get people rehoused. Having them go into shelter and get rehoused is the next step and the next level. But then often there can be recidivism where they return to homelessness and that cycle continues without that ongoing support. And so these are kind of our by the numbers, and it tells exactly the same story. If you look at, for us, the cost per individual of each of these programs is really just astounding. Shelter is the most expensive per person. Getting someone into housing, and that includes rapid rehousing where they can bypass the shelter system. And then the cheapest is eviction prevention by far. So really, it's a matter of as much as we can, saying this to as many people as we can so that they understand that just spending money on overnight beds is not going to solve this problem for our region. So I think that is my set of slides. I'll turn it over to Peter.
Right. Thank you, everyone, for having me and all of us here today. I don't have any slides, so I'm just going to talk for a little bit. I represent Northwest Housing Alternatives, and for the last 40 years, in addition to being a housing developer, we have been operating our Annie Ross Housing Services, which was the first family shelter in Clackamas County. So we're right outside of Portland. I've been at Annie Ross and at NHA for 6 years. So I'm really going to talk and share some numbers during the time that I've been there because I can answer a lot of questions about that time. During that time, we have served 200 families. So we are a smaller program than that of Elisa's and of Brandy's. We work with 8 families at one time. And out of the 200 families that we've worked with, 95% had a positive housing outcome. I want to repeat that. 95% had a positive housing outcome. Now, that's not 100%. So there are families who really aren't working well within our program. And I really kind of like to reframe that with our staff. And these are families who we are not yet working well with. And so we always look for ways to improve our services. So we're not happy with 95%. We'll be happy when it's at 100%. That's our goal. Over the last couple of years, we've made some significant changes in our service model that were really, COVID was a huge catalyst for many of these changes. And this really helped take what was a very good program into what I think is a really great program. And the main change that we did is we no longer, just like Elise talked about, we no longer view us as having a separate shelter program. We have a singular housing program. It happens to offer shelter, but it is a housing program. If I was here 6 or 7 years ago, I would have talked to you just about our shelter. And I would not have talked with you about case management or supportive services. I would just talk about the physical shelter itself. When we changed our philosophy, I now talk about the entire continuum of services that we offer. We offer case management, housing navigation, barrier busting, rental assistance, employment support, and shelter. And making that shift into viewing shelter as just one of our services was huge for us. And it was a really dramatic shift. And two things, just two examples of this really sort of shine a spotlight on how our numbers have gotten so high with being successful. It used to be, before this shift, that we would let families be in shelter for a couple of weeks, sometimes even a couple of months, until they told us that they were ready to look for housing. We've changed that. Right now, if you were to come into our shelter program, within the first batch of paperwork that you're going to do, and we're social services, we love our paperwork, we have paperwork, but within that first batch, you're going to be filling out a housing application. In fact, if we can only do one paperwork form within our first meeting with you, it's going to be a housing application. That sets the tone. We are about housing. And then secondly, there's been some families, as I've mentioned, who were not successful in our shelter. And in the olden days, if you weren't successful in our shelter, you couldn't get any of our other services. But now when families are not successful in our shelter, we'll ask them, would you still like to receive housing services? And around half of the families that have had to exit our shelter were able to stay connected with us and get housed. And that all happened when we took a more comprehensive look at our shelter array and really at our service array. Another thing that happened due to COVID is right before COVID, we opened up a beautiful new building in Clackamas County, and we were able to grow from 5 families at one time to 8 families at one time. And it was a state-of-the-art building, and we opened it in November of 2019. And then in March of 2020, COVID hit. And all of a sudden, our state-of-the-art building was no longer helpful if you were trying to stop an airborne pathogen. And so our immediate response to COVID is half of our families remained in our shelter, so we were able to provide them a little bit more space, and half of our families, we started using community-based hotels. Our assumption when we started this is that the families in hotels were going to languish there. They were going to be in hotels for a much longer period of time. The data never showed that. In fact, the data showed the opposite. Families in hotels were able to get housed faster than families that were actually in our congregate shelter. In January of 2022, when the Omicron variant of COVID came out, we moved everyone into hotels. And we made the decision to not go back into our congregate model. So we've rented our building out to another wonderful organization and called NEA, and they operate a family shelter in our building, and we're thrilled with that. And we now operate our Annie Ross shelter utilizing community hotels. We found that to be really beneficial because it's very flexible. Clackamas County is a large county. And instead of having people come to us, if there's a family that's in Malala and the children are going to school in Malala and the family's going to be looking for work in Malala and looking for housing in Malala, they don't have to come and spend time in Milwaukee. There's a hotel in Malala. We can keep them connected to their community. It also allows us as case managers to focus on housing, housing, housing. That gets to be our main focus. And there was a subtle thing that occurred, which is there's much more of a connection between issues in a hotel and issues in an apartment. So sometimes our families may do something and the front desk staff may not be happy with that, and they'll give us a call. We have good relationships with the hotels. And when we're talking with the families, and they'll talk about, yeah, that front desk staff, they're upset that we have guests over. We can bring that to their lease. Well, when you get an apartment and you have a lease, what will your lease say about guests coming over? What will your lease say about the number of people that can be in your unit at one time? And we've seen families really be able to make some changes in some of their behaviors, so they become much more successful when they move into apartments. The two final things that I think help make us successful, and I know make Brandy's work and Elisa's work, and if Emmy were here, Emmy's work successful as well, is we have intentional and meaningful relationships with our community providers. In order for the Annie Ross program to be successful, Family Promise needs to be successful, Path Home needs to be successful, Raphael House needs to be successful. Annie Ross House is not going to end homelessness in the Tri-County area. I need all of our service providers to be as successful as they can be, and we work together in meaningful ways and meaningful partnership all the time. And then within our work, we take a very strong team approach. So while a family will have ideally just one person that they can work with, we want to minimize people having, to have 5, 6, or 7 different points of contact. We want to minimize that. So while they have one primary staff person that they'll be working with, that staff person has an entire team. The staff is never alone. And so throughout the week, we have multiple team meetings where staff get to support each other, get to share resources, and get to really rejuvenate in this work that we do. Thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you, all our presenters. I just want to wrap up with one final thought before we open up to questions. And I also have a packet that is names all the common elements of the shelters that presented today, and what we want to see invested into our shelter models. Right? You might have heard some shelters are closing. That is not the answer we want to see. We don't want people who are accessing services to have those services taken away. We want services to be elevated. This is a rare instance where quality services are the budget services, right? When is it ever financially the smartest thing to do the humane quality thing? And so just really wanted to uplift that. And I'll also point out, you heard from mostly family shelter providers today. That does not mean families are unique in what they need to get into housing. As Brandy said, right, Housing First has been proven in other cities to work for anyone, no matter their acuity level, no matter what support they need. Our region has just not yet invested to the level outside of the family structure to give individuals who have higher acuity the support they need. So I just want to families are just being better taken care of, quite frankly, in our region, and we're extending them that grace and sympathy, and we need to be doing that at a broader scale for folks who aren't in a family structure right now. And then who should I send? I want to be able to send the resource to the group. Which co-host should I send it to? And then I will let y'all facilitate for questions.
Emily, this is Sarah Bell. You might forward things to me, and then I'll distribute it to everybody after the session.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's get to some questions. We just in some rich discussions and presentations, and I'm sure there's some questions that have been generated. John, do you want to go first? And
yes.
then John, you and Carol just bounce back and forth.
Okay. Yeah, we'll alternate.
Yeah.
So this is a question. I'm not sure who it's for. I think it's possibly for Brandy. Could one of you speak to why Multnomah County doesn't fund the third step of supporting supportive services in the Housing First model? Third step is recovery, I believe, recovery services.
Yeah, the third step is just all kinds of services. Recovery would be one of the services, but it could also be domestic violence intervention, mental health care, employment training. It could be connection to school resources, all kinds of physical health care. And so that third piece is that most important, the case management and services. And why doesn't Multnomah County invest in that? Goodness gracious, that's the, $64,000 question that everybody wants to know. And I get this question a lot, and I've talked about it a lot. And so, I think what it comes down to, and what I'm about to say is a very cynical answer, and I'm not a cynical person. I'm usually a very hopeful, positive person. But the only thing that my colleagues and I have really come up with is that when elected, that our services, Multnomah County services, are over. They're the elected officials, the county commissioners are the ones driving the decisions for how we invest in homelessness in Multnomah County, and the city of Portland counselors, the same thing. These are not experts in homeless services. They are experts in other areas of their lives, but not in homelessness. And they are the ones that are deciding the course for how our funding gets invested in providing services. What I've seen from our elected officials is that they over focus on outputs and they don't focus at all on outcomes. And the difference between outputs and outcomes is outputs are counting things: number of shelter nights, number of hygiene stations, number of tents distributed. But outcomes are the changes that are made in the lives of people. How many people move from homelessness to housing and stay there and improve their mental health and get employment resources and get better income? Those are outcomes. Our outcomes are hard to get, right? Those require lots of case management, services, dollars, but outputs are often easier to get. You fund some shelters, you fund some things. Food distribution is another output. And our elected officials want to be able to say, here's my goal. I have accomplished my goal. Now reelect me. And so they're over focusing on outputs at the expense of outcomes, like truly implementing housing first.
And if I could just add to that, it's not just Multnomah County. Most county and social services are very county driven across the United States. Most counties and most states focus on the first two and not the third. It's very easy to pick on Multnomah County, but it is a national problem that we are seeing.
And I will add to that because we have Metro, which provides funding across all 3 counties, the same really goes for that body. They provide funding through something called Supportive Housing Services Measure. And that, that commission are elected officials, and even the advisory body is comprised mostly of either elected officials or not folks who are service providers, not folks with lived experience. So really understanding the problem can be challenging.
I'll also add real quick, I know we're running up against time, but this is kind of my call to action. So as Elise mentioned, a lot of the funding comes from Metro, that's supportive housing services tax. Welcome Home is going to release a proposal that does what addresses Brandy's concern, changes the oversight to experts, not politicians. Politicians have a role in speaking for their constituents. They are not experts on homelessness. And so just if you want to join like our email list, that's where we send call to actions. You can just visit our website, and then I'll pass it back.
Thank you. I'll jump in as the other person looking at the questions coming in. First, it's so great to have you all here. It is so impressive to hear about this quality of programming and what you're accomplishing. So thank you for sharing that. It's fun I've known Brandy for a long time and followed that program, but to hear some others. And just to put in the thing that we do have a Family Promise approach on the east side here too, which some of our various congregations are here. It's somewhat of a different model, but yet it's really, I think, worked well. Anyway, we had
they're a great organization. They are still doing the rotational model, but have recently acquired a house.
Yes,
to be a static site that will double their capacity on the east side.
Yeah,
so definitely.
Right. Yeah. So we're pleased with that. We got a question from Sue Gimmel that kind of builds on this whole thing about, is there a regional approach that kind of helps these programs to be aligned so outcomes can be aligned, et cetera? If you want to just talk a little bit more about that. Kind of, is there some group, she asked, that looks at the big picture here?
I would say Welcome Home is that group. We made a task force of providers that receive or have been denied SHS funding despite doing supportive housing services in our region, and wrote out a 7-page proposal of new goals that, as Brandy said, aren't outputs, they're outcomes for people, that the goal is always housing outcomes. And right now, there isn't a regional approach to the supportive housing service measure, which is our biggest funding source. It is each county gets to decide. And quite frankly, Clackamas and Washington have done a good job investing in rent assistance. They also have more per capita than Multnomah County. But as we heard, housing is actually cheaper. So that's where there's this mismatch between reality and the politics of what's sellable to people who are going to be voting people back in. So I would say we're definitely deeply tracking SHS, and it needs to be renewed in 2030 by voters. And we see that there needs to be more trust with voters before it's going to be successfully renewed. And to build that trust, we don't want to just like do a campaign. We want to actually see measurable improvements to the rollout and some improved standards that are based on expertise and not politicking. Yeah. That's my really quick answer.
Thank you. John, you want to take the next question?
We have a question. Please talk about case manager availability, that is skills needed, typical training for case managers, etc.
Sure. I can give that a stab. What I have found in my, 40 years of doing social services is that there really are sort of two types of case manager, if you will, experience and background. We have people who are, I would say, highly educated. They went to school, they learned about it, they have great professional experience, and they're really ready to go. And then periodically, I'll be interviewing someone with no experience, no background in this field at all, but they have an ability to connect that is really just wonderful. And so I think that we look within our team, we really want a very well-rounded team. So there are times when I will hire someone with great depth of experience, and other times I'll hire someone brand new to the field. This may be their first social service job, but I can sense an ability to connect. Case manager is a people skill. You need to be able to connect one-on-one with the families that you're working with. And so that would be the highest skill set that is needed.
I'll just add really quickly to answer that question too, is that there are people who want to be case managers out there, and they need to make a living wage in order for them to be a case manager. And so that's, where Path Home, the county funding that we get from Homeless Services Department does not pay a living wage. So we do fundraising so that we can supplement the amount of money that we get from Multnomah County in order to pay a living wage. And what happens is our case managers, because they make a living wage, they stay for a very long time. We have multiple case managers who have been here 10, 12, 13 years at Path Home. And that provides this level of continuity of service for the families that if you worked with Angie in 2016 and you call Angie's phone number, Angie's still going to be the person that answers that phone. And we always tell the families, call us first before you call 211. Because we might be able to help you kind of navigate some things. And in terms of training, we train all of our case managers in trauma-informed care, anti-racism and anti-oppression, assertive engagement, and motivational interviewing. Those are some of the really, really big ones that we would lean on a lot in order to be able to provide really culturally responsive and trauma-informed services.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just agree.
Yeah. And we thank Brandy, who came early in our days of the Alliance to train us in trauma-informed care. We really appreciated that because that's helped shape our understanding of that. We have many questions here. It's hard to choose which one, but I'm going to choose one that's kind of in the news right now, that the mayor apparently announced yesterday about having 1,600 of apartments available. What do you think of that, and how would that play out in your vision of this?
Well, one thing I would say is that many of those 1,600 affordable units that we have are not actually affordable to people who make very low income. And so affordable housing, lowercase affordable housing is affordable if it costs 30% of your income or less. And so if you're a minimum wage earner, you're bringing home maybe $30,000 a year, you need to find an apartment that is $850 a month for that to be affordable for you. These affordable housing, capital A affordable housing units, as I call them, they're like $1,500 a month, sometimes even more than that for a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment. So the families that we're serving can't even afford the affordable housing. We have maybe a third of the families that we work with, and there's not a ton of it. And it's very complicated and confusing to get into. So maybe only a third of the families that we work with move into truly like subsidized capital A affordable housing. The rest of the families, we work with a lot of mom and pop landlords that provide naturally occurring affordable housing. We're going out to the market right now and finding apartments on the market from mom and pop landlords that are cheaper than those affordable housing units.
We do the same thing as well.
And a unique challenge with families is needing larger unit sizes. So it's easier to get a studio that's affordable than it is to get a 3-bedroom unit that's affordable.
I'll also add just that the reason these units are so affordable is not because nonprofits running these affordable housing are greedy and want that money, right? Just level setting that is because they are receiving federal funding and they have to set rents set on how the federal government says we set rents, and that's on an average median income. So that's including, Phil Knight is included in calculating what the average is. And actually, Portland Housing Bureau did a study saying if we excluded homeowners from our calculation on what that median is, it becomes way more affordable. So it's a federal systems change we need to make. It is not a failure of our amazing affordable housing developers, but we do need to come up with a better system. And so I will plug always, we finalized a curriculum on social housing that can offer more truly affordable housing. It is taking traction in the region. Our affordable housing developers are interested in using that model. So there's movement to challenge that broken system. And a lot of these units are, folks, if you're living on SSI, you're making maybe $900 a month, right? Like if your rent isn't maybe 30% or isn't down to that 30%, but you're inside, that does make a difference. But you can pair reduced units with rent assistance to bring it down. But we're not allocating money towards rent assistance. The state cut it. The feds cut it. This is, I think to Peter's point, we're not trying to be like, Multnomah County is the worst. We're unique. Though it's just the data we have for our region that really frames this most clearly, I think.
John, you want to?
Okay. So I think you may have just answered this question, at least indirectly. How about the empty, low-income housing in Portland and the need to encourage landlords to do a higher level of maintenance?
I had a different point. One other thing I want to add on that is the city of Portland did just come up with a more innovative solution to address that high rent. So part of the reason those rents are high is the federal model. Another part of the reason those rents are high is because developers have to take on a lot of debt. And they do need to stay, to build these big apartments, they need to stay afloat and they're not getting preservation funding. But the city of Portland just put, I think, $9 million to do something called a debt buy down. So imagine you have a mortgage, you dump a bunch of money into your mortgage, and then you get to refinance and your monthly payment is better. It's essentially that for affordable housing. And they're doing that with the expectation that this lowers rents for tenants. Not that, folks get raises, even though we want everyone a living wage, that debt buy down then results in more accessible rent. So there is moves to address that, and that could also increase like investments in fixing things. But our affordable housing funding system in the United States is just quite frankly not doing well enough by our tenants. That's why Welcome Home has stepped away from advocating for just building units. We're not going to build our way out of the crisis, and wanting to redefine the system as a whole with more of a social housing model.
Okay. If I could just add, what I love about these questions is the questions themselves. And if I could leave this group with a takeaway, it's continue to ask questions. Ask questions of providers, ask questions of politicians. If somebody tells you that they have a 3-point plan to end homelessness, start shaking your head no. I've been doing this work for 40 years, Brandy as well, Lisa as well, Emmy as well. There is no 3-point plan to end homelessness. We would have done it. And the solution to end homelessness doesn't fit on a bumper sticker. It doesn't. So ask questions and make sure that the politicians can go deeper on their answers.
Yeah, this was a question that was asked, I think, with this last group of us that did a forum at the church in February. What would it cost to actually end homelessness? And the four of us are kind of laughing because so many of these things start so far upstream with healthcare, bankrupting families, with lack of affordable housing, with education issues, with systemic racism, that we're trying to solve something that started so far upstream of our programs and then being blamed when our Band-Aids aren't sufficient. So that sounded a little cynical as well, but I just want to echo Peter's ask, why 3 or 4 more times? And
right. Great questions. Karen, would it be all right for us to go a bit longer to about 10 after or so? I'm going to assume that. I'm going to ask a question about, you've talked a lot about the shelter model or mentioned the shelter model. Do you all, it's not what you all offer. Do you see any benefit to the shelter model at this point? And if so,
Yeah.
what?
So what I would say is, for us, it takes around 80 days from the time we first have contact with the family until that family gets housed.
Mhm.
And one of the reasons that that it takes, and for us, that's a low number. And actually, I have to subtract 25 days from that because it takes around 25 days between the time a family knows where they're going to live and when they can move in. An apartment needs to be painted, the door needs to be fixed, they need, a new appliance or something. So it really takes around, probably around 55 to 60 days.
Mhm.
If they weren't in our shelter system, if we didn't know where they were, if they were struggling and living on the streets and living in their car and having to do those, that survival mode that Brandy had talked about, that would take much, much longer. Much longer. And so even though as I said, we've reframed it and we have a housing program, our
Mhm.
housing program works at a faster rate when we are sheltering families, when we're providing that service, than for those families who I mentioned, there are some who don't want to be sheltered. They want to
Mhm.
still, stay it sometimes it is in their car, things like that. But it takes longer with those families. So
Got it.
sheltering definitely has a place, but it's got to be connected to housing,
Mhm.
housing, housing, housing.
Mhm. Okay.
I fully agree. Shelter is a critical component of the system. I don't think any of us, we all run shelters. We're proud to run shelters. And I don't think any of us are saying we shouldn't have shelter. We
Okay.
need to make sure that the balance of shelter to housing is correct in our systems. And right now in Multnomah County, it isn't. We are over investing in shelter. Half of the money we spend on homelessness in Multnomah County goes
Mhm.
directly to shelter.
Mhm.
Most of those shelters do not have a pathway to housing. And
Okay.
so it's critical that we have the shelters combined with housing. And this is what I often say, and I'm surprised that our elected officials don't get this. But if you want to create more shelter capacity, you don't have to build more shelter. You just need to move the people through the shelter so that more people can move in. And it's like
Mhm.
this kind of movement through, and you can actually serve just as many people through that model of moving through shelter as you can by opening new buildings.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. Um, John, do you have another couple? I have a
Yeah,
couple.
yeah, how are we doing for time, Karen?
Excuse me. How about going until 1:15?
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, I have a question. How do all your service providers get acquainted and work together? And how do you share information about what works?
I'm guessing that's for the coalition, or because I know Peter, you talked about like maybe if you want to also answer like how the providers stay interconnected outside of the
Yeah,
coalition.
I think there are multiple ways, and so certainly the Welcome Home Coalition provides a table, provides a space for that. There are other community and regional based tables that we also sit at, and that our staff sit at. But I think the biggest way is when one of my case managers picks up the phone to talk to one of Brandy's case managers. And then maybe we're going to loop in another case manager, and is really, none of us take the I alone will be successful with this client. It's we will be successful, and if order for my part of the we to be successful, we need to reach out to Elise. We're going to reach out to Elise, and we're going to reach out to Emmy, and we're going to reach out to Brandy, and we're going to make those connections. And part of our new employee orientation, and I would imagine it's the same with the other programs here, is we talk about who are your community colleagues and make sure you connect with your community colleagues.
Yeah, 100%. Everything Peter just said. In Multnomah County, all of the homeless service providers, the executive directors meet every single Monday at 4 o'clock. And we have been doing this for 6 years.
Yeah.
And so we, every single week, all of us, Central City and Our Just Future and Join and NEA and NARA and SEI and Latino Network and El Programa Hispano and ERCO and all of us, get together every single week. Bradley Angle, Raphael House, we get together every Monday at that level, and we strategize, we advocate together, we share resources. Our then it goes down. There's this misnomer that there's not a lot of collaboration between providers, and there's so much. Our case managers meet every other week. There's like 10 family organizations, most of the ones I just mentioned. Our case managers meet once a month. Our middle managers meet once a month. Our leadership teams meet once a month, in addition to this Monday at 4 every week meeting. And so there's just so much rich dialogue and sharing resources and supporting each other.
I'm going to give the questions that are still on, and you can just jump in there. First, let me just say to Dave Albertine, the social housing model is something we are hearing more about, but I think it's worthy of a whole other session. So to not proceed down that. One of the questions is the state collaborating with you all in terms of social services like food stamps and Medicare? Are they part of your system? Yes, no.
They've made a declaration to support the shelter system throughout the state, but are not looking downstream in that they cut from the budget the rental assistance component that really gets people to move beyond shelter. So I think there's a somewhat shallow approach at the state level.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it was the word collaborate that got me in your question, Carol. And I don't sense a collaboration. They do fund. There is money coming in, and as we had talked about, all of our programs, there is a cost, and so that's important. But I don't sense a state collaboration.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Next question was: do you find much high substance abuse in your families that you work with compared to, say, single individuals who are homeless?
No, we certainly find substance abuse. It does exist. I'm not going to minimize it. It's certainly there. There sometimes may be a member of the family unit that may have it, but at least in our programming, and I know the same for Brandy and Elise because we've talked about this before. It is not the driver for homelessness. It is not.
And I think the last question that I've gotten so far is peer support. Is that part of any of your models?
Yes, absolutely. Over half of the people who work at Path Home, we've got about 60 staff. Over half of our team has lived experience of homelessness. We have a lot of certified peer mentors who work here. And that is, going back to that question about, what's the best practices for case management, having people with lived experience of homelessness and recovery and mental illness is critical. And it's one of the things that we credit our success to, is that the families feel it. The families know when someone has had a lived experience, and they're just able to break down barriers so much faster because people know what they've been through.
Thank you. John, you want to
how is family defined for the family programs?
We actually needed a policy for that, and we do not define family relationships. We allow the families to do so. So for our program, we do need 2 people. There needs to be one who is a chronological adult, one who is a chronological minor. And so we need at least 2. They can be as large as increase in numbers. But we've worked with grandparents raising grandchildren. We can have aunts and uncles, nieces and nephews. We could have an older sibling with a younger sibling. Most of our families are parents and their children. But we do not ask for documentation. We're not proving that. We let you decide. We let you decide how to define family.
Yeah, same for us. We have to, the only requirement is that there is a minor and an adult as well in our program.
Same for us. And if you can think of a family configuration, we've had it: single parents, married parents, unmarried parents, same-sex parents, intergenerational families, like all of them.
Okay. Well, it's one of those times when you think there's so much information, and there's such gratitude to all of you for just presenting. Thank you to John Elizalde, who let us know of the opportunity to have you come, and we just are so appreciative of the work you do and the time you've spent with us. So thank you so much.